All right. Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with you all. Gonna pop this up. So, can you see that clearly? Perfect. So, as Joe shared, my name is Peter Sandwall, and I am from Mansfield, Ohio. And I'm going to talk about expanding access to HDR brachytherapy. Um, this is kind of my outline slide. I wanted to be to share exactly where Ohio is. We like to say that it's the heart of it all, and so at least in the United States, it is right where the heart is located. So I'm going to share about my experience with Radiating Hope, which is a nonprofit organization that has been working on expanding access to radiotherapy in developing areas and resource limited settings. And then I'll also share a little bit about my perspective on global awareness and what that means. That's also one of the reasons I shared this map is there's often some assumptions about like, well, you know where I'm from or vice versa. And I don't know that much. I'm always learning more, and I really enjoy learning from others. And then again, I'm going to talk about HDR brachytherapy, and we'll briefly touch on some of the technical elements. And I think the more of the emphasis is actually going to be on program development and kind of getting the pieces in place to start a program, to get HDR implemented in your clinic, in your country, but also just expanding access to this. So I do work for a health system, OhioHealth, in Ohio, and we're spread throughout this state. So I've got this logo here just to give respect to my employer who gives me the time to do these things. So let me talk a little bit about Radiating Hope. So Radiating Hope is a nonprofit, an NGO, non-governmental organization, and the mission is to improve cancer care around the globe. And it started really focused on providing radiation equipment to developing countries, and it's 100% volunteer run. It was started actually by two radiation oncologists who were mountain climbers, and they would go all over the world to climb mountains. And one of the places that they is very popular is Nepal, to get to the base of the Himalayas. And when they went, there was very little radiation oncology infrastructure, and they made friends with the professionals there, and have helped develop the program in Kathmandu and others around the world. So this is the kind of the website, and they use these climbs as to build awareness and to raise money to provide equipment. And these are some of the places that they've done some donations to. And one of the first ones, I think this is the first I was aware of Radiating Hope, was with their Senegal project, and they donated an HDR afterloader to Senegal. And there's some lessons that were learned in this process. You can see there was, the afterloader was in 12, and then with training then, and then training in 13. And then there was a training in new equipment in 17, because when they had returned, there wasn't, the prior equipment wasn't being used. So it was, there are some lessons that have been learned along the way about equipment donation, and that it's not always the right path. So we've been leaning a little bit more into education, and that's this statement. Donations can hurt, but education echoes an eternity. You teach someone, and that they can teach someone else, and so on and so forth. So it's a force multiplier. This donations can hurt. I'm not sure if this link, maybe you can copy it, or if you can use it later, but it's a link to a TEDx talk by a professor in North Carolina who learned some of these lessons that I myself have had to learn, and others have had to learn. And that's that if you just donate equipment without ensuring that the infrastructure is in place to utilize that equipment, the motivation, the desire to leverage that, the engineering support to fix things when they break, then it can actually be a burden, and it's not so helpful. And so that's been a big paradigm shift, and something that I'm kind of passionate about, just based on my own personal experiences. You know, it's nice to help with equipment, but if you can help with education, that's much more impactful and lasting. And maybe the equipment can come too after the infrastructure is developed. So I'm going to share about two other physicist members of Radiating Hope, Adam Schulman and Matt Goss. Adam was involved in the Senegal project, and he also helped collaborate with Reos Contra Cancer, which is another nonprofit. And if you look on YouTube, you're going to be able to see a lot of the educational videos that they provided. And a lot of my friends in global health have worked on these training videos. And these haven't just been for physicists, but they've been for technologists and oncologists. And I think they've been really useful. And there's actually a whole series on HDR. And those are all accessible on YouTube. You can just search Reos and HDR, and you're going to get a whole bunch of these different things. And they're going to explore different technical aspects of HDR, everything from source exchanges to shielding calculations to planning. So that's one thing. And then here's another thing that Matt has been working on for the Ukraine. And this I think they're up to 40 lectures now. And these also are accessible. These are another opportunity. You can view these yourself. I believe you may have to search for them, but this Help Ukrainian group, Natalia is a big part of this. She is a champion, Natalia Kovalchuk, and I kind of want to highlight that idea of champions, because this project, this project for Ukraine, and they're actually an offshoot of work that was done for Nigerian physicists, and they have a champion too, Iabusa. And there are champions, and you can become a champion for your own area, because that's what it takes. You don't want someone like me outside who doesn't know anything about your particular area driving what your needs are. That's up to you. But this has been another great thing, and Matt helped spearhead this along with Natalia. So again, this is just moving away from equipment to education, and that's just been kind of my journey in global health, and the journey of many others. So I just kind of wanted to share and highlight that. So what is global? This is getting into the question of awareness. Like, the globe is a big place. It's a big area. I haven't traveled to many areas, and I've got this graphic here to show that we don't share daylight with the rest of the world. Like, we share daylight with a small piece of the world at a small part in time. So the timing of this at 10 a.m. is so that I could share daylight with much of Africa. Although I have to admit right now that I think it's nighttime in Asia, and so I'm not as connected with that area or aware of that area and its needs as I would like to be. But I just wanted to share with you that, like, I'm aware, I guess, of the limits of my perspective, and I hope that we can all be aware of that. Now, things that have helped increase our awareness and increase our connections has been the internet. This is actually the census came from a botnet. This is essentially like a virus that put in a little bit of line of code into the Internet of Things. So little refrigerators and different things, anything that was connected to the internet, it would ping this botnet, and so that they could determine um, activity over time. So what you have here is you see that same graphic where the night is passing through and there's daylight. It's a heat map. So you see in the daytime, everybody's very active. In the evening, they get less active. At night, even less. So one of the things that I liked about this graphic is it showed, at least in 12 years ago, almost 13 years ago, where the people that were connected to the internet were. And you can see there's a lot of connections in India and Southeast Asia. Africa is not as connected as we would like it to be. And I think that's changing. And part of what's allowing that to change is satellites. Now we have SpaceX putting Starlink up, and we've got these trains going across. And hopefully in the future, everyone who wants to be connected in terms of information and opportunity can be. So the global connections are increasing, and hopefully our awareness will too. So moving on back to the main topic, which is brachytherapy. But I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to start even before brachytherapy, and that's Atoms for Peace. So Atoms for Peace was a program started by Eisenhower. It actually comes from a speech he gave to the United Nations, and they had this series of books. But the whole thing was after World War I, when we dropped the bomb, and when the United States dropped the bomb, two of them, there was a lot of fear about what nuclear technology would do. And he gave this speech to kind of shift the paradigm, shift the focus away from war and towards development. And that's the key part of this speech was that the inventiveness of man shall not be dedicated to his death, but consecrated to his life. So instead of developing this technology for war, we would develop it for human health and for human wellness. And that's actually the founding principle of the IEA. There's the largest mural in Vienna now is actually a woman on the headquarters releasing a dove, and that's part of it's part of their slogan, essentially, Atoms for Peace and Development. And these books were about reactors and also radiation biology and medicine. And it's sad, but it's also true that sometimes good things come out of bad events. A lot of our technology development in terms of radiography and even the basics of CT came from the need to find bullets in soldiers. In World War I, Marie Curie drove around with radiographs, and then all that development from those terrible things led to good things that we use now to support human health. And one of the things that came out of our studies in nuclear reactors were the development of activated products, such as iridium-192 and cobalt-60. So why brachytherapy? So brachytherapy is mandatory for the curative treatment of all invasive cervical cancers. And the World Health Organization has a global strategy for the elimination of cervical cancer. And part of it is a roadmap that outlines 90, 70, 90 targets for 2030. That's that 90% of girls will be fully vaccinated with the HPV vaccine by age 15. That 70% of women are screened with a high performance test between their 35 and 45 years of age. And 90% of women identified with cervical disease will receive treatment. That's 90% of women with pre-cancer treated and 90% of women with invasive cancer managed. Now that's an ambitious goal. And the only way we're going to reach it is to disseminate this technology, to build infrastructure, to implement this kind of technology, such as HDR brachytherapy. And these are two publications by IEA. One about how to manage cervical cancer in limited resource settings, and another one, how to plan for radiotherapy services. So radiotherapy is an incredibly effective and useful tool, and as physicists, that's part of what we're doing. Is we're again using that inventiveness of man towards its life. We're working to improve human health. So let's talk more about brachytherapy. So there's a radiation source. It's in close contact with the tumor. Brachy comes from the Greek root meaning short, meaning close. So we're putting the source near the disease. We're putting it right up against the disease in many cases. So there's different types of brachytherapy. In the case of cervical cancer, we call this intracavitary, and this is actually kind of a tandem and ovoids. So you've got the main part going into the cervix, treat the cervix, and you've got these ovoids on the side to get the cuff. And so these applicators, the source would go down them and slowly be retracted or go forward. But this is the way to get the radiation directly to the source. You're not having any entrance dose. You're just getting it to where you need it to go. So with this technique, you can give a really high dose, a really high and conformal dose. So, but other organs such as the bladder here outlined in orange and the rectum outlined in blue, you can spare those. So you can get this really high dose to this critical organ between these two sensitive organs. And it's by putting these HDR or these by designing the placement of the source. If we're using HDR, we're actually going to put in a high dose source and then slowly pull it back out. We can create these pear-shaped volumes, and I want to make it clear that we've been doing this for a long time. We've been doing this before we had HDR. And when we were doing this before, we would have points and we would have prescription points, and we'd have point A. We would actually kind of scale this pear shape without all this imaging that we have today. We kind of knew the distances that would work for most of the patients, and it was very effective. The reason I'm highlighting this is because I think sometimes we get caught up in what we have today, and we think that's the only way. And the truth is, it has been historically effective. It was historically effective with historical techniques. So if you don't have an MR and all this, the latest and greatest, that doesn't mean that you can't still be effective for your population. And I just want to hammer that, because I think there is sometimes a mismatch in ideas. Like, if you don't have the latest and greatest, you're not capable. That's not true at all. And I just wanted to kind of highlight that. So why HDR brachytherapy? And I mentioned that kind of, I made a statement sort of close to the fact that there are other forms of brachytherapy, such as low dose rate. We used to use cesium-137, but why high dose rate? Well, it's very versatile. You can use it for a lot more than cervical cancer, lung, esophagus, breast. There's lots of different things you can do, including head and neck, prostate, and soft tissue sarcomas. initial cost of HDR is significant. It's not cheap, and there's also, you've got to plan ahead for source exchange, and that's not cheap either. So there are significant financial needs to implementing this. However, you have a capacity to treat a lot of patients, and if you set up your program correctly, if you create your workflow appropriately, you can manage a lot of patients. I'll share a program developed in Nicaragua where they're doing 10 brachy patients a day on one afterloader, and that's a lot. And these are very the capital setup capital is significant. However, it's not nearly the capital for an accelerator. So again, setting up your workflow and creating a good throughput, you can have a strong economic advantage in providing this. So let's talk a little bit more about the technical aspects. And I'm a geek. I'm a physicist. I like this stuff. I like the mechanical aspects of brachytherapy too. So it was developed in the 70s. It's funny how things come about. There, you say one person invented it, or you say another person invented it. Oftentimes, when things are mature, when things are ready, like an invention will pop up at several places at the same time. I think about Memorial Sloan Kettering as one of these early people that did this, and they had like a box with these source cables and these check cables. And these are just these are motors with encoders telling them how far out they've gone. And what they'll do is it'll push out a check cable to make sure the path is clear, pull it back in, and it'll push out the source cable. And it uses these optical encoders to know how many revolutions and how much distance that it's gone out. And the basic principles of this haven't really changed much. There have been some additional sensors that have been used, but it's a pretty robust system. There are some concerns, safety concerns, when these motors fail, because they do, and or when one of these bends is more significant than expected, and so sources can get stuck. And it's just I want to highlight the fact that these rare events do occur, and that's kind of the value and the importance of that annual safety training. And I've had friends who have had sources stuck out for various reasons. Either it's equipment malfunction, or it's based on the placement of the applicator, the bend that the source had to make. So those rare events do happen. Safety in this respect is very important. And I also want to highlight the fact that when a source is stuck out, for us, the physicist outside of the room or going into the room, our safety is not that big of a deal. I'm not saying that it's not that big of a deal, but we are not as in danger as the patient with the source stuck inside of them. So whatever fear or concern that we may have for our individual safety, it should be secondary to that patient, because the patient has a much higher risk with that source stuck inside of it. So get in there and get that source out as quickly as possible. So there are different types of sources. The Iridium 192, this was kind of like what allowed HDR brachytherapy to first be implemented. They were able to miniaturize it and make it into a small enough volume that it could be put on the end of a wire. Only recently have they been able to have they miniaturized the Cobalt 60 source to work in the same catheter needles. And you see here, it's roughly a millimeter. So they're roughly the same size. And the big advantage of Cobalt 60 is that 5-year half-life, it lasts a lot longer. If you look at the different dose distribution between cobalt 60 and iridium 192, they're relatively the same. The one difference is that with iridium 192, it's a lower energy. It has a dimple at the top of it because there's some shielding. Where with the cobalt 60, it doesn't really have that dimple. So there are some slight differences, but this has been a great thing because it allows for longer lasting sources to be available. So these are the different afterloaders, and these are just a few that I'm aware of. And part of the reason I mentioned that whole thing about global awareness is that I know there are other afterloaders that I just don't know about. So if you are aware of something else, I'd love to hear about it. I'm sure, and I believe that there should be other manufacturers of this technology. I have a Western bias lens, so I'm much more aware of Elekta and Varian, which are both Northern European companies. So the main ones are the Flexitron and Bravos. This Bebig is a different. It's not Elekta. It's Ickert and Ziegler is also, I think, popular, but the Flexitron and the Bebig actually allow the cobalt 60. So in resource limited settings where source exchange may be expensive and or difficult due to transportation, cobalt 60 has very distinct advantages. And so that's why I have these kind of bolded, because of this cobalt 60 capability. If you're starting a program or you're moving between programs as a physicist, you have some awareness with one afterloader, please don't take it for granted that the other afterloader works the same. Each one has its own peculiarities and differences. One of the big ones is the way that the source is moves. I mentioned before, like the source would come back. That's source pulling, and that's common with Varian afterloaders. But Elekta afterloaders push the source forward, and that's another one of these common errors, or maybe not so common, but they do occur. Like, let's not don't fool ourselves into saying these things don't happen. They do. People will set up a plan because they were used to one, and they'll actually program it reverse. And that's happened many times. And instead of the source reaching the tumor target, it's irradiated the patient's inner thigh, or it's irradiated the patient's shoulder. So those things do occur. So please don't ever take it for granted that, oh, I know afterloader, I've worked with brachytherapy. Learn the new system if you're switching systems, because there can be some very serious safety concerns anyway. So basics of shielding, linear attenuation. This is very common transmission calculation. This equation that we learned, in our first year is only valid for narrow beam geometry. It's only valid for, you've got like it's kind of like a laser stream of radioactivity or photons. But the truth is, you've got to account for buildup and scatter. And so you need these barrier transmission factors that account for the buildup of broad beam geometry, which is what most things are. So this linear attenuation is always good kind of as an approximation tool. When you're doing shielding calculations, you need to take into account that scatter and the buildup through the use of barrier transmission factors. Now there is an NR or an IEAE report on shielding for radiotherapy facilities, and they go through the details of shielding calculations. I do like this this National Commission on Radiation Protection, this NCRP report, simply because it's simple. I like things that are easy, and it uses tabulated buildup factors. And again, these will give you approximations. I strongly recommend that if you are going to do your own shielding calculations, cross-validate it with expected results from publications, and or get another physicist to check your calculations. Also, there are people who do this like all the time, and if you're only doing it once every 10 years, maybe you want to ask somebody else to help you with that. I don't personally do shielding calculations. I'll do a survey, but the shielding calculations, I leave it for people who have done a lot of it and can do it very well. So this is just kind of the basic shielding calculation for the barrier transmission factor. And then this is all outlined in this NCRP. Here are some rules of thumb. It's kind of like for safety. I like these things, these sanity checks. When you have these rules of thumb, you can kind of get an idea of, well, is this reasonable? So for iridium 192, you're going to use about 4 cm of lead, or about, works out to being about 35 centimeters of concrete. If for cobalt 60, you're going to add 15 centimeters of concrete. And these again are just sanity checks. And but there are publications out there that kind of share these what might be called, you can call them generic shielding plans. The problem is that these are for specific spaces, and you may not have that space available to you, and you may even need to use a hybrid of concrete and lead to fit into the space that you've been provided to place your afterloader. So these are great starting points, but they're not something you just use blindly. But I do like the idea. I do like sanity checks and rules of thumb. So it's good to have these, and then you can use them for the basis of your planning. So big thing about brachytherapy is it uses radioactive materials, and the sad fact is that we live in a time when security is emphasized due to the risks that are associated with releasing radioactive materials into the public and into the environment. So each country has their own rules and regulations. The IAEA has recommendations. Most countries align with those, not all. So it's important for you to understand your local codes and conditions. But generally, you need to have locked storage for your HDR afterloader, since it has the radioactive source in it, a high activity radioactive source in it. They want to maintain source control. So you need to have a locked room with access control, along with locked containers and devices. And you need to have surveillance. It needs to be controlled, a controlled area. And I know that countries that the United States has worked with, they've helped implement biometric security, so like retinal scanning and fingerprints and things like that. And sometimes this can be extra costs that can feel like barriers that maybe you don't want to work through. But there are grants and there are support for implementing those things. So don't let it hold you back, but it is an important consideration. So now I'm going to get into what I feel is the more of the meat of this presentation. A lot of this I've been sharing a lot of background and kind of outlining things. Now I'd like to kind of talk about what it takes to create an HDR service line, to create a brachytherapy service line. So kind of the needs, what you need to have in place, the infrastructure that you need to have in place, the investments that you need to be prepared to make, the imaging options that you have, what's feasible is, there are different ways to peel an orange. There are a lot of different ways to do these things and accomplish the goals of delivering high quality brachytherapy. So there's not one size fits all. There are options. But another thing I want to emphasize is the location and layout. We're all kind of constrained by the buildings that we have. And I'll repeat it again at the end, but there's a quote, essentially, it's first we shape our buildings, then our buildings shape us. And it's really important to realize how you lay out your department, how you lay out your program. It's going to constrain the efficiency of it. If you've got your imaging on the other side of the hospital from your treatment delivery, that is going to have serious implications into how many patients you can treat, and maybe even the quality of those treatments if you're moving the patient a lot. So workplace design, location layout, very important. So the infrastructure, what do you have to have? There's kind of two things. There's operational elements and there's clinical elements. So what are the operational factors to consider? So radiation safety, ensuring you have a strong radiation safety program, good safety culture is important. Since you're going to be dealing with a high activity source. Existing facilities, what you have available to you now, and how you might be able to fit a new program in there if you're developing a new program, or if you're going to build a whole new thing from scratch, what you want it to look like. The human resources that you need, like you need staff, you need trained staff. Who are those people? What is their training? And what is your commitment to continuous education? And then it's also important to analyze your patient volume. What kind of case mix are you going to see? Are you going to see enough of a particular case that it justifies the investment in those applicators? And or are you going to see enough cases that you can develop the competency to treat those cases with the level of quality and care that you want to? And obviously leaning in and emphasizing cervix. But as I mentioned before, there's lots of other opportunities with brachytherapy. And there's lots of other sites that you can treat that way. And as a physicist, the best you can do with this is have a good discussion with your radiation oncologist and determine, because they're also going to have to engage their referring specialists to determine what the caseload may or may not be. And I recommend all the IEAE books. They're free and they're excellent. And this is a good one in terms of setting up a program. It includes not just external beam, but it also includes brachytherapy. So what are the clinical steps that you need to review? And that's, how are you actually going to deliver this treatment? Where are you going to place the applicator? What imaging are you going to use? Who's going to do the treatment planning? Or are you even going to do treatment planning? Are you just going to use a library of plans, which is a very valid approach? And then where are you going to do the treatment delivery? What are the rules and regulations for your particular area, for who needs to be where for each of these steps? And here's another IEAE document about implementing high dose rate brachytherapy in limited resource settings. In particular, this one's very specialized to HDR in limited resource settings. This is from the AAPM Task Group 59. It is kind of dated at this point, but it has a a proposed flow. And I want to be clear that this flow right here that they're showing is just an example. And there are lots of different ways to do this. And it's based on your staffing and based on your layout, how you're going to lay things out. In this model, we've got a technologist, we've got a radiation oncologist working with a nurse, we've got a physicist, and we've got a dosimetrist. I know much of the world, a dosimetrist and a physicist are the same thing. The physicist does the treatment planning. So that collapses these lines. It's wonderful if you can have a nurse. Sometimes people don't have nurses available to them. So maybe it's the oncologist who's doing all this. And I also know in many parts of the world, the oncologist is the oncologist, period. Radiation and medical, they're the same thing. They're just another form of practice. In the States, we have a separate practice for radiation oncologists. And then the technologist, you may or may not have a technologist available to support this treatment. And so you may actually have a two-person model, which I've seen in practice, where a physicist and an oncologist work closely together to do all these tasks. Ideally, you're going to have redundancies and you're going to have backup and second checks. But in resource-limited settings, you can, without compromising quality, you can create safe systems with what you have. So this is important to map out. You're going to want to map this out for your particular practice. So the investments that are necessary. So there's capital that you're going to need up front to build it, and obviously there's going to be ongoing costs. But there's also human resources. Humans are investments. You invest in their education to ensure that they're capable, and then you invest in their continuing development to make sure that they maintain their capabilities and they grow their capabilities. So these are important considerations that have to be communicated to the administration to ensure that you have a successful program that's going to deliver high quality care. So money is important, and that's like something you can't get away from. You may have a national healthcare system, in which case there is one person who controls that flow, or one organization that controls that flow, or you may have a free market society where you've got entrepreneurs and investors coming from all different places. You've got to outline the money that's going to be required to build this system, to build this program, the construction costs, the equipment costs, and with the equipment, it is not a one-time, one and done. And that's what I've seen, where I've seen a lot of things fail in the past, is people think that I'm going to buy this and then I'm ready to go. The truth is, you need ongoing service. And we're moving away from this idea of you buy something and then you service it yourself and you fix it. They've moved towards software as a service. It's also just many things are as a service. You, instead of buying the device, you buy the service that ensures that the device continues to function properly. And that's something that really needs to be accounted for, is the ongoing costs to ensure that the equipment maintains its capabilities and isn't just left to the side after they didn't have to allocate the money for a source exchange for 5 years or whatnot. The staffing, again, what you're gonna, this is just a proposal. This is actually a very old presentation regarding brachytherapy program. And this is Western centric. So what's good for in the United States might not be good elsewhere. This is kind of their proposed model, that they would have a technologist doing this, doing one full-time technologist, a half-time nurse, a full-time person up at the front desk, half-time physicist, half-time dosimetrist. These are just estimations, and you need to be able to develop this for your own program based on the workflow that you design. And then these are some outdated costs, but an example of kind of what you need to do to ensure that you've got a good awareness of the costs that are going to go into maintaining your program. And I want to emphasize that service contract. It's such an important element that I've seen missed several times. And again, this will go into what I don't see here is the imaging. If you're going to use existing imaging or if you're going to buy new imaging. So these are things to consider. So that's where we're going now. There's lots of different ways to do this. Historically, we did this with planar radiography. This is just a simulator or a fluoro unit, C-arm. And we liked this for radiotherapy because it was kind of mimicking the setup of external beam. So we would use this and we would have those in our departments. But we have fluoros and we have mobile fluoros, and those are all valid imaging modalities to get the images you need if you're going to plan with the conventional A/B method in terms of distances and points. There are new CT simulators or new mobile ones that you can. This is actually a cone beam that you can get three-dimensional images with, and those are obviously preferred methods for advanced planning techniques, and can even go as far as MR. And this is a low-cost permanent magnet. This has its own caveats. Obviously, you get better soft tissue delineation, and you can create high dose or high risk PTVs, and you can actually see more. You can see better. But this has its own caveats. You need to ensure that you have MR capable applicators, and you have to make sure that you have a safe way to move patients from the MR to the treatment table without displacing the applicators. So there are what I don't mention, and what I should, or I'll mention verbally, is that ultrasound should also be explored and may also be a low-cost alternative and maybe even something easier to use than planar radiography. How that's implemented is still, I'm not sure that that's been well defined, but those are opportunities. So the workplace design, that location and layout. So you've got some requirements. You need a place to put the applicator in, and some of these places can be the same place. Some of these rooms can be the same room. You need a place to put the applicator in. You need a place to perform the treatment. You need to be able to image where the applicator is, make sure that it's properly placed, and then you need some place to do the planning. And I say that the planning one's fuzzy because you could be using template plans, but the proximity of these different places, it can significantly influence the flow and efficiency of your program. Again, I mentioned this earlier about the Nicaraguan program, where they developed strong efficiencies to treat many patients. How closely you place these things, how you set this up, really will play a role in this. And if you're doing other things other than cervical can be done without anesthesia, or you may do it with anesthesia. That can significantly impact your program, and that can be a rate limiting step. So if you got to do these in a sterile room, if you're going to do interstitial, where you're actually placing needles instead of just intercavitary, then you need to reduce the risk of infection by using a sterile environment. And again, that can impact your program. I'd like to emphasize to minimize movement. Unfortunately, I know that based on the design of a particular program, you may not be able to. You may have to move the patient from bed to bed. There are ways to do this You can use sliders, and I'll share some other technology that actually helps with that. But do your best to minimize the movement, because once that applicator is placed and you've imaged it, any movement is going to increase the uncertainty of its position. So there are three major room layout options for application, imaging, and treatment. So the one option is you've got a treatment room with the shared use of existing operating or procedure rooms. So you're gonna maybe it's your treatment vault, or it's your simulator room. But you've got a treatment room with a shared use, and then you've got a treatment room with an applicator insertion and treatment delivery where the imaging is performed elsewhere. So one, you've got your imaging in the same place. The other, you're imaging them and you're moving them. And that's that again. I'm mentioning that minimizing movement. The Zephyr system. This is just a brand. I think they were the first to kind of come out with it. They kind of used like an air hockey table to move the patient over. I think others have developed their own. But this is a way that you can do a smooth transfer of patient from an imaging table back to a treatment table. And based on your resource needs, you may not be able to leave your patient on the CT table, or you may not be able to leave them or use the CT room for these things. So you're going to have to move them back out. Another option is, and this is the most resource intensive option. I like this one, but this is where you have an integrated brachytherapy suite where you're actually treating them on the imaging table. You don't move them. You just put them there. You image it. You put the applicator in there. You image them without moving them, and then you treat. And I know there are facilities that do this. It's just not. It's resource intensive, but I think that is kind of the best if you have the space and the ability to dedicate an imaging system to this program. Going back to your program, map your process, design your process, and then periodically review and revise it. And I got some of these slides from Andrew Farash, who's a physician who works with a good friend, Arjit Bhagwala, in Houston. And they got a really high volume program. And part of the way that they've been able to create a high volume program, just like I mentioned the Nicaragua program, which is the next slide, is by designing their workflow to ensure that that each role and responsibility and the location of all these are clear. And so you need to make sure that all the staff are aware of what the flow is, and that includes the supporting staff that may not be part of your direct team. If you're using anesthesia or other referring physicians, such as a urologist, may be involved in prostate. So having these process maps is important, and then performing in-services and team meetings, huddles, to ensure that everyone's on the same page is really, really essential. Another thing is parallel processes. I mentioned an integrated suite. You may actually want your system not to be integrated. You may want your imaging to be in one place, your treatment to be another place, so that you can be imaging the next patient and planning the next patient while you're treating the first patient. And that's what they set up in Nicaragua. Is they kind of have these people, they have these different things staggered. So when they're on their first patient, they're just starting with their first patient in the sedation. When they're actually preparing to treat their first patient, they're sedating their second patient. When they're actually treating their first patient, their second patient is under preparation, and their third patient is under sedation. So that's what's allowing them to make efficient use of their resources. And they published this. This was with the University of Miami. They were able to kind of, they also to improve their throughput, they used template plans. So that was a more efficient process so that they could utilize their resources in a more efficient manner. So again, these huddles, these meetings, you want to prepare ahead of time about anything new you're going to do, and prepare for the unexpected. Kind of like I mentioned, those never events. Sources really do get stuck. Applicators break. Things that you don't expect to occur do occur. So being aware and being ready for those things are important. Having your process maps, mapping out your process and your flow is essential. Again, huddles, and always use safety as a first principle, but efficiency as second principle. And one of my favorite sayings is, an efficient process is a safe process. If you develop something that's clean and not complicated, that's safe. So focus on that. An efficient process is a safe process. So going back to the what you need in place, you're going to have expenditures. There's going to be financial implications for these things. So make a list of the things that you need to make a program happen, the things that you would like, the things that you want, and the things that you wish you had. And that's okay, because you start with the needs, you start with the essentials, you grow into and you get what you want. It happens. It just doesn't happen on your timing. It happens in the universe's timing. And truly, if you name your wish, that'll probably happen too. It's just being patient with the process, but also having it mapped out. So build as you go and be strategic in your investments. So focus on those needs and be strategic on your wants, but dream big. And I want to emphasize again that this is an ongoing expense. It is not an initial investment and you've got a program. You've got to plan ahead for the expenses, such as source exchanges, such as continuing education. And that's something that needs to be communicated to the administration. We know everyone likes to think about capital expenditures as like, well, this is what the building's going to cost. But you need to consider the operational expenditures. What's it going to cost to keep the lights on? What's it going to cost to keep the water running? So that is the presentation, and we're kind of at the end. I just want to hit some key points. Just have an awareness of your patient population, your staffing needs, what you have, your facilities that are available, what your needs are to start and maintain, strong emphasis on maintain a program, the costs and the benefits of the imaging technology that you have available and or select for your program. And I want to emphasize again that location and layout matters. Like I said before, we shape our buildings. Thereafter, they shape us. That's it. Thank you very much. I'll open it up to questions now.